The weight of his discharge papers still fresh in his pocket, Caleb aimed to ghost through that humid ER dawn without a hitch. But June derailed him, ethereal thin, eerily still, harvesting bottles from the steps as though they were lifelines to a shattered home. Strangers averted their eyes, untouched. Caleb stared transfixed. River's cry exploded inward like incoming fire, visceral and demanding, rousing the warrior he'd leashed and the human he'd numbed, compelling him, against every instinct, to stand his ground and not flee. The light came slowly. Not like the triumphant burst of sunrise you might see in a movie, but the kind that crept in uncertainly, gray before gold, soft before sharp. The kind of light that didn't wake you up, but made you realize you'd been awake all night. A thin fog blanketed the parking lot of Sandhaven General Hospital. It curled around the bumpers of parked sedans, clung to the glass panels of the sliding entrance doors, and pooled low to the ground like it was hiding from the cold. Nothing stirred. Not yet. The world was paused, quiet enough that the buzz of an old street lamp nearby felt like a song trying to remember its melody. On the far end of the lot, near the loading dock where delivery trucks dropped off pallets of gauze and bulk packages of latex gloves, a small figure crouched by a concrete pillar. She was wrapped in something that once might have been a jacket. The sleeves were too long. The color faded into a memory of green. Her shoes, canvas and soaked through, had holes at both heels, and the laces looked more like frayed fishing line than anything meant to bind. Her name was June. She was 9 years old, thin in the way that came not from illness, but from having to grow up too fast, bones learning to carry more than they should. She was still almost statue-like, though the cold had begun to bite through the soles of her shoes, and her fingers trembled slightly against the handle of a small fabric tote. It was still too early for the first bus. The hospital cafe inside hadn't opened yet. No one was watching, which was why she had chosen the spot. Out of sight, but close enough. Close enough to hope. A quiet, shaky sound came from the bag at her side. Not a cry, just the faintest whimper, so soft it could be mistaken for a breath. June shifted, bringing the tote closer to her chest. She unzipped it partway, slowly, with care. The zipper hissed in the silence like something too loud for the morning. Inside, wrapped in 2 dish towels and the last clean part of an old blanket, lay a newborn baby. A boy. He didn't stir when the cold air touched his skin. Didn't even flinch. His tiny face was pale, not from sleep, but from something heavier. A quiet kind of fading. June pressed her palm to his chest. A slow, shallow rise beneath her fingers answered her. Still breathing. She closed the bag again, not all the way, just enough to keep in what little warmth there was. The night before, she found him beside a dumpster behind the convenience store near the underpass. No one saw. No one cared. But she had picked him up, just like she had picked up empty bottles or discarded pennies on the sidewalk. Only this time, what she picked up had weight. A heartbeat. She had whispered to him, then, in a voice no one else heard. "You're not trash. You're not nothing." Now, as the morning frost settled into her sleeves, June blinked at the lights above the ER entrance. It seemed close, just 50 yards across the lot, but it might as well have been a mile. She had walked all night, through alleyways, over cracked sidewalks, past barking dogs and flickering motel signs. She hadn't stopped, not once, even when her legs hurt, even when the wind sliced through her jacket like knives made of air, because he had kept breathing, and as long as he did, she would keep moving. A truck's engine coughed to life somewhere behind the building. A low rumble vibrated through the pavement. June didn't flinch. She wasn't hiding. Not from the cold. Not from the morning. She was waiting. But waiting was dangerous now. The baby stirred again, just the faintest flutter under the blanket. His lips were tinged purple, and June saw it. Saw what came next if she did nothing. The kind of stillness that didn't go away. Her heart kicked harder, sharper. Not fear. Not exactly. Something older than fear. The same thing she had felt when her mother once coughed blood into a sink and told June to stay strong. Something no child should have to name. June stood up. The motion was small, almost clumsy, but it cracked the quiet. Her knees trembled, not from cold anymore, but from decision. She adjusted the bag strap across her shoulder, tightened it as best she could. The baby didn't cry, but that silence said more than screams ever could. She stepped forward, across the empty parking lot, shoes soaking into frosted pavement, knees stiff, hands red with cold. One step, then another, eyes locked on the glass doors ahead. This wasn't just about surviving the cold anymore. It was about breaking through something bigger. Something that said you don't belong here. But she would walk through it anyway, because for the first time in a long time, she was carrying something that mattered, and she wouldn't let it die. The hospital doors loomed closer with each step, their smooth white surface catching the first hints of morning. June's breath came out in thick, rhythmic clouds now. Her legs moved on instinct, not strength. There was no drama in her movement, no cinematic music rising behind her, no spotlight, no voice shouting for help. Just the scrape of old sneakers on cold pavement and the soft, almost imperceptible sound of a child exhaling. She paused briefly near a parking sign, squinting at the shifting figures behind the glass. Nurses in scrubs passed in and out. Purposeful, it hummed with fluorescent urgency. But none of it was for her. She adjusted the strap of the bag on her shoulder. The baby stirred slightly, a flutter against her ribs, but didn't cry. That was worse somehow. A delivery truck pulled into the lot behind her, the brakes hissing like a sigh. A nurse walking past didn't notice the girl standing just outside the main doors. She didn't look, just tapped at her phone, murmured into her Bluetooth earpiece, and disappeared inside. June stepped toward the entrance. The doors parted with a soft mechanical hush. Warm air met her face like a sudden question. Inside, the tiled floor gleamed. The overhead lights were too white, too bright. The contrast made her flinch. For a moment, she stood still, one foot inside, one out, as if she didn't quite belong in either world. A security guard stood near the reception desk, broad-shouldered, clean uniform, a clipboard under one arm. He was chatting with someone, maybe a nurse, maybe a clerk. I didn't notice her. Or maybe he did, and just chose not to react. June shuffled forward. Her legs trembled. She cleared her throat, but no sound came. She tried again. Please, barely above a whisper. The man kept talking. She took one more step. Her knees ached now, scraped from the night's walk, stiff with cold and exhaustion. She stood directly in the space between them and the doors. That's when the nurse beside the guard looked over. Her eyes swept from June's face to the bag on her shoulder, then back again. A small wrinkle formed between her brows, the kind people made when something made them uncomfortable. Is she with someone? The nurse asked the guard, voice low. The guard turned, his brow furrowed. Kid, where are your parents? June didn't answer right away. She was too busy adjusting the blanket inside the bag, checking for warmth for life. She looked up at them, not pleading, not desperate, just full of a tired kind of hope. I need help, she said. Is that a doll? The nurse asked, stepping forward a half step. June shook her head. She unzipped the bag just enough. The nurse saw the blue-tinged lips, the tiny limbs curled too still. Oh, the guard's posture changed instantly, shoulders back, jaw tight. He didn't move forward. He didn't reach out. Where'd you get that baby? He asked. Not gently, not harshly, just with suspicion, like June had broken a rule he hadn't explained yet. I found him, she said. Where? The nurse asked. June opened her mouth, but the words tangled in her throat. She could describe the alley, the dumpster, the smell of rotting cabbage and beer cans. She could draw the map with her eyes closed. But she didn't know the street name. She didn't know the zip code. All she knew was cold concrete and a baby that still breathed when no one else noticed. Behind the store, she mumbled. Near the bridge. The nurse glanced at the guard. No records. No adult. We're not equipped for this. We should call child services, the guard said. But he's cold, June said louder now. He's cold and he's not moving. The nurse didn't respond. Her arms were crossed now. The look in her eyes had shifted from curiosity to protocol. Behind them, a receptionist looked up briefly from her desk, then back down. A janitor walked by pushing a yellow mop bucket. The world inside the hospital kept moving, fast, bright, indifferent. June lowered her voice again. He's still breathing. Please. But the guard stepped back, lifting his radio. We'll need someone from intake. I'm not intake, June snapped, surprising herself. I just want him to live. Silence. The kind that doesn't fall like a curtain, but creeps in one breath at a time. The nurse looked away, and for a moment, June saw it. What her presence meant to them. Not a child trying to save another, but a complication. A question mark in a system that needed clean answers. She stepped back. The doors behind her stayed open for a few seconds longer, as if undecided, then closed with a soft hiss. Outside again. Same cold. Same fog. Same baby. Same girl. She sat on the concrete bench this time, back to the glass, facing the rising light. She didn't cry. Not yet. Just closed her eyes for a second, her hands over the baby's chest. She thought of the night before, of the stillness in that alley, of the moment she picked him up and felt warmth, faint but present. She had thought that was the hard part. But the hardest part, it turned out, wasn't the alley. It was standing in front of a building filled with lights, doctors, warm air, and being invisible. But he was still breathing, so she would still wait. The automatic doors slid open again, this time not for a child or a nurse, but for a man in a weathered army field jacket. His boots were laced tight, the left sole slightly worn uneven, the way long marches leave their mark. In his right hand, he held a plain envelope with hospital markings, post-deployment checkup, final evaluation. In his left, nothing. He wasn't in a hurry. His name was Caleb, 38 years old, United States Army, recently discharged. He'd been on 2 rotations, came home not with medals, but with silence. Layers of it. Silence in his gait, in his eyes, in the way he looked at ordinary things as if they might suddenly disappear. He had just completed his final medical appointment. A routine debrief that involved too many questions and too little listening. How are you sleeping? How's the appetite? Any recurring dreams? He had answered them all the same way. Short, quiet, polite, fine, fine, don't remember. He had no intention of staying in the city longer than necessary. His old truck was parked 3 blocks down by a tree that leaned like it was tired. A long drive ahead, out to the hills near Mason County, where a cabin waited. Empty, but his. He hadn't lived there in years, but it was familiar, and these days that counted for something. He stepped out of the elevator and into the lobby. The warmth of the building was starting to irritate his skin, too dry, too artificial. He adjusted the collar of his jacket and kept walking toward the entrance. The doors hissed open with a soft familiarity, and the cold outside bit at his face like it was testing him. Asking, "Are you ready to feel again?" Caleb stopped, not because of the wind, not because of the light, but because there, near the bench, just outside the glass doors, was something that didn't belong. A child, alone, the same girl who had briefly passed his periphery when he first entered earlier that morning. Just a glimpse then. He had assumed she was with someone. She had that look, kids who trailed after tired mothers, or waited near vending machines for a nurse to finish her shift. But she was still there, still sitting, still holding something. Caleb squinted. The bag at her lap moved. Barely, but enough. His body responded before his mind caught up. Not with a sprint, not with panic. Just a slow, decisive pivot. Boots turning back toward the doors. The motion was unhurried but unmistakable, like gravity itself had shifted and he no longer had a choice in direction. He stepped outside. Cold air wrapped around him like a second uniform. He walked slowly toward the bench. The girl didn't look up at first. She was cradling something close to her chest now, arms curved protectively, like a bird guarding a nest from wind. A nurse exiting the building past him didn't even glance at the girl. The glass doors closed behind them both with a hush, sealing in the warmth. Caleb approached. Closer now, he could see her face. Young, pale, eyelids fluttering with exhaustion, the kind that didn't come from missing a nap, but from carrying too much weight for too many hours. Still, no one else noticed. Still, no one stopped. He stood a few feet away, then sat down slowly, letting his knees bend with the kind of care that comes from muscle memory and old injuries. No words yet, just the creak of bench metal under his weight, the sound of his jacket settling into place. The girl's eyes flicked up, cautious, unreadable. She didn't speak either. The thing in her arms shifted. A baby, swaddled in layers of mismatched cloth, tiny head barely visible, blue lips, a stillness that hit Caleb harder than any desert wind ever had. He leaned forward gently. "I'm not going to touch," he said, voice low, the way you speak to a wounded animal. June didn't pull away, but her arms tightened instinctively. Caleb nodded once, almost to himself. He recognized that look, not just in the girl, in the baby, in the air around them. He had seen it in the eyes of fellow soldiers in the sand, when time hung between seconds, and the next breath felt like a miracle waiting for permission. He took off his gloves, then slowly removed his field jacket. Underneath, he wore a plain, thermal shirt. The cold bit harder now, but he didn't flinch. He folded the jacket in half, extended it toward her. "For him," he said. Still no movement. He didn't reach out again, just left the jacket gently beside her. It smelled like dust, smoke, and something warm. June looked at it, then at the man, then back at the baby. Her arms loosened slightly. Enough. Caleb didn't smile. He didn't ask questions. He just waited. Waited in the kind of stillness that told a story without telling it out loud. The baby gave a small breath. Barely there, but it was enough. Caleb stood up again, slow but certain. "Let's go inside," he said, not as a suggestion, but as something already decided. And this time, when the hospital doors opened, someone walked through them with purpose. Caleb didn't speak again, not because there was nothing to say, but because the moment didn't need it. Words were for rooms with clocks and rules. But here, in this pocket of cold morning where a girl with hollow cheeks sat holding a newborn close to her bones, language felt like too much and not enough all at once. He looked at her again, really looked. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry, the way someone's eyes get when they've already emptied everything they had to give. Her fingers were cracked, curled protectively over the baby's back. Her lips had turned a pale, stubborn line. She didn't shake anymore, not from fear or cold. Just sat there like stone that had decided not to crumble, even under weight. The kind of weight a child shouldn't have to carry. Caleb slowly crouched down in front of her, not a man hovering, but a man meeting her where she was. Their eyes were level now. The baby whimpered again. Just once. A small, dry, breathless sound that barely reached the space between them. June looked up at Caleb, measured, cautious, unreadable. Caleb didn't ask who she was. Didn't ask where her mother was, or how long she'd been out here. Didn't ask why no one else had done a damn thing. He just reached down, picked up his field jacket, unfolded it, and gently draped it over the baby without touching her hands. Then stood again, slowly, letting the air fill the silence. A nurse came out of the hospital then, clipboard in hand, steps quick, focused on some task unrelated to them. She glanced their way, registered the child, the man, the strange shape beneath the jacket, paused, but only for a moment, then kept walking. Caleb didn't look after her. He was used to people walking away from things they didn't understand. He turned back to June. This time, he moved deliberately. No sudden motion. He crouched again, this time placing one knee down slowly into the cold concrete. He lifted the edge of the jacket gently, peered at the infant. Caleb had seen bodies. He knew the signs, but this one wasn't gone. Not yet. The chest still moved. Faint, like a secret. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a clean cotton rag, folded into a square. Not sterile, not official, just clean. He placed it around the baby's neck to buffer the cold against his hand. June flinched, but didn't stop him. "I'm going to lift him now," Caleb said, softly, not asking permission, not announcing a plan, just speaking the truth of what came next. He slid one hand under the baby's shoulders, the other under the lower back. Moved slow, gentle as prayer. The baby made no sound, but his arms tensed slightly as he left June's lap. She reached instinctively, her hand grabbing Caleb's wrist. He paused. She didn't speak. Her eyes just locked onto his, wide and terrified in the quietest way. Caleb nodded, not to say he understood, because he couldn't, but to let her know he wasn't going to disappear. That whatever happened next, he wasn't walking away. The girl released her grip, and the baby shifted softly into Caleb's arms. Caleb stood. His body was solid, grounded. The child weighed next to nothing, but he held him like he weighed the world. He turned to June, jerked his head gently toward the doors. "Come on." She rose slowly, legs stiff, movements cautious. Together, they walked. Not rushed, not dramatic, just forward. The sliding doors opened again, a whisper against the air. Inside, heat rushed to meet them. A woman behind the front desk looked up, blinked. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't ask to speak to his supervisor. He didn't demand answers. He just kept walking toward the ER. A security guard began to stand. "Sir, you can't." Caleb didn't stop. Those two words, nothing more. They cut through the hospital's artificial calm like a thread snapping. Another nurse, older, with silver streaks in her tied-back hair, stepped from around the triage desk. "What happened?" she asked, brisk but not cruel. Caleb laid the baby down gently on the closest examination stretcher, still wrapped in the jacket. He was found outside, in the cold, by this girl. She kept him alive. The nurse's hands were already on the baby, checking vitals, looking at the fingers, the skin tone, the mouth. Someone called for an attending. June stood just behind Caleb, eyes wide, hands twitching at her sides. A younger nurse approached, trying to guide her toward a seat. She resisted, only slightly, but stayed close enough to Caleb's coat to brush against its fabric. The emergency team began their quiet ballet, and Caleb, he stepped back, not far, just enough, and stood watch, like he used to, not over a camp or a checkpoint this time, but over something smaller, something breakable, something worth saving. The ER doors swung wider as the medical staff arrived, not in a rush, but with that practiced urgency of people who knew exactly how much time they didn't have. A male nurse took one look at the infant and called for a warming blanket. Another pressed 2 fingers to the baby's neck and shook his head. Pulse weak, he said to no one in particular. Very weak. The woman in charge, someone had whispered her name, was Nurse Geraldine. Lifted the infant's tiny arm, looked at the color, pressed a stethoscope to the chest, and frowned. Caleb stepped back as they moved in around the baby, forming a protective arc like soldiers shielding a wounded comrade. But no one asked him to leave. Maybe it was the way he stood, straight, hands loose at his sides, eyes tracking every motion, but without judgment. Maybe it was the jacket, the boots, the way his silence felt earned. June didn't follow him fully into the room. She stopped just short of the threshold, one hand resting on the doorframe, as if asking for permission she didn't believe she deserved. One of the nurses noticed her. Are you her guardian? The woman asked Caleb. No, he answered simply. She found the baby. A pause. No one asked more. There wasn't time. Another nurse lifted the baby's head, gently, and slid a warming pad underneath. Monitors blinked. The oxygen mask was too big, but it was the smallest one they had. Someone adjusted the heart monitor, and a soft series of beeps began to echo, a rhythm, slow and erratic, but present. June's eyes never left the table. The blanket Caleb had wrapped the baby in, the army green coat, was carefully set aside, folded by one of the nurses, and placed at the foot of the stretcher, as if it, too, had been part of the rescue. Internal temp is dangerously low, someone muttered. Let's get the pediatrician down here. I'll call upstairs. Words bounced gently across the room, like hands passing something delicate. June stepped in one more pace, still not speaking, just watching. Caleb looked at her, then looked at the door. In another life, on another battlefield, that kind of stillness meant something was about to go wrong. But here, it meant something was trying to go right. He moved back toward the girl, slow and steady, and stood beside her. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. A feint. He saw courage not as something loud, but something quiet and ragged, stitched together with whatever scraps were left. No one called her a hero. No one applauded. But in that sterile ER, filled with the hum of machines and the scrape of rolling carts, June's presence was a kind of quiet protest against everything that had tried to make her invisible. A protest that had finally been seen. Behind the curtain, the doctors moved. The baby made no sound, but the chest rose more regularly now. The color, just a touch, had returned to his cheeks. The purple beneath her eyes, the blood crusted at her knee from some fall she hadn't mentioned. Then looked back at the nurse. No, he said, then paused. But I'm here, and sometimes that's enough. The emergency room quieted, not into silence, but into a kind of stillness that hummed just beneath the surface, low, alert, alive. Machines clicked softly in rhythm. Monitors blinked their pale green language. The attending physician arrived without ceremony. Mid-50s, sleeves rolled, silver at the temples. Eyes dark with tired knowledge. Caleb remained by the glass partition, not more than 5 feet from the hospital bed, but emotionally further than any protocol could measure. He didn't try to get closer, didn't lean in. He stood like he had stood 100 times before, on the edge of a compound, in the shadow of concrete walls, scanning the horizon for what might come next. But there were no gunshots here, no enemy beyond the cold still lingering in the baby's blood. Just breath, just hope, just time. June sat near him, small knees drawn to her chest, hands twisted in the hem of Caleb's coat, which had now been placed back around her shoulders. It dwarfed her, swallowed her whole, but she didn't seem to mind. She sat like someone who had finally been given permission to be tired. Every now and then, Caleb glanced down, not at the baby, not at the nurses, but at her. He didn't know her name yet, and somehow, it didn't matter. Her presence didn't require explanation. She wasn't noise. She was fact, and the weight of that fact pressed against the glass between them and the baby, clear and cold. On the other side, the older doctor, Dr. Parker, someone had called him, spoke in clipped tones, not loud enough for Caleb to hear through the wall. but clear enough in gesture. He pointed to the warming unit, gave a brief nod, then began inserting in 4 into the baby's tiny arm. A nurse stabilized the infant's leg with her fingers, careful not to bruise the skin. The baby hadn't cried once, not since Caleb had lifted him. That absence echoed louder than any scream. The glass between Caleb and the team fogged slightly with June's breath. She leaned forward, eyes unblinking, as though willing the child inside to stay tethered to the world by sheer force of attention. "She's not letting go," one nurse had whispered earlier, when June refused to leave the baby's side. "She can't," Caleb had said. "She kept him alive all the way here." It wasn't a boast, just a truth, like weather or war. June shifted slightly. "He's so small," she said, first word since the doctors took him. Caleb didn't reply. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was stating the reality of it, how terrifyingly small life could be, and yet how heavy it felt when you were the only one holding it. Outside, the world began to stir. The hospital lobby filled. Phones rang. The distant beeping of an elevator echoed down the hall. Morning was unfolding like any other day, except here. Here, behind this pane of glass, time remained still. Caleb placed one hand on the railing beneath the glass, thumb pressed white into steel. Not out of tension, but as an anchor. Something inside him shifted, quiet and unmistakable. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was choosing to stay, not just for the baby, not just for the girl, but because something in this moment had reached into the quiet places inside him. Places the desert hadn't touched, places the military hadn't broken, places even loss had only passed by, and that something had asked, "Are you still willing to fight?" Caleb's answer didn't need words. He stood straighter, not stiff like parade rest, but alert, ready. The hallway behind them remained empty, except for a janitor who paused, leaned slightly, and then wheeled her cart around the long way to avoid disturbing them. She didn't speak, but she nodded once as she passed. June didn't notice. She was too focused on the baby. "Will he be okay?" she asked, not loudly, not pleading, just the voice of someone who'd learned to ask questions she didn't expect answered. Caleb glanced down at her, and for a moment, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes deepened, not from age, but from memory. He bent down just a bit, resting one knee briefly on the tile floor, until their eyes were level. "They're fighting for him," he said. June nodded once, not fully understanding, but trusting enough. The nurse inside the ER signaled toward the hallway. Someone brought a mobile incubator, sleek, humming, sterile. The baby was lifted carefully from the table, wires still connected, and transferred into the warmth. The door opened with a soft hiss as they wheeled the incubator past Caleb and June. Neither reached out. They just stood there, like guardians without assignment. When the doors closed again, June leaned her forehead lightly against the glass. Her breath fogged a tiny circle, and she didn't wipe it away. Caleb remained beside her, still, unmoving, willing. Whatever came next, he was already part of it. The hallway outside the pediatric emergency wing had no windows, just long stretches of beige paint and polished floor that reflected the flicker of overhead lights. It was the kind of space meant to be forgotten, built not for beauty, but function. But to June, it was the first place in days that hadn't tried to push her away. She sat in a molded plastic chair, legs drawn up tight, knees tucked beneath the oversized army jacket Caleb had placed over her shoulders. Her fingers worked the edge of the fabric, folding it, smoothing it, gripping the seam like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. Her shoes didn't touch the floor. They swung slightly, like they used to when she was smaller and her mother still took her to church. But this time, they swung not out of boredom or rhythm, but because her legs were too tired to be still and too sore to rest easy. Beside her, Caleb leaned against the wall, not seated, not pacing, just standing the way men do when they don't know how long they'll be asked to wait, but have already decided they're not going anywhere. His arms were crossed loosely, one boot planted slightly ahead of the other. Weight shifted into the kind of posture soldiers never really lose, even long after the uniform stops being mandatory. He hadn't said much since the doctors took the baby through the doors. June hadn't asked him to. Every few minutes, someone in scrubs passed by, sometimes with a clipboard, sometimes with a cart of supplies. They moved quickly, efficiently, but none of them looked at June. None stopped to ask why a little girl was sitting in a hallway wrapped in the jacket of a man who wasn't her father. Maybe they assumed she belonged to someone. Maybe they knew she didn't. Either way, no one interrupted, and so the minutes passed. June stared straight ahead into the muted wall opposite her, but her eyes weren't seeing paint or tile. They were focused inward, on images burned too recently to fade. The cold of the alley, the ragged breathing, the sharp sting in her knees when she fell running. She thought of the baby again, not with fear this time, but with something more dangerous, memory. She had carried him in her arms across parking lots and broken sidewalks, through alleys that smelled like things no one wanted anymore, through cold air that bit her ears and made her lips split, through a city that hadn't looked at her once. He had been heavy, not in weight, but in responsibility, and she had chosen to carry him. Chosen. No one had asked her to. No one had told her she should. But no one else had come. So she had gone. And now, he was in there. And she was out here. The thought made her press her face into the crook of the jacket, where the scent of Caleb's coat still lingered. Faint leather, worn fabric, the ghost of smoke. Not a smell she recognized. But it wasn't frightening. It was real. Solid. Like stone walls in an old building. Like trees that didn't bend. Caleb glanced down once, his head tilting just enough to see her. Still didn't speak. Still didn't move. But his presence held the shape of a hand reaching out, even without touch. June shifted slightly. One hand crept across the seat until it rested lightly against the fabric of his sleeve. Not pulling. Not gripping. Just resting there. Barely touching. Caleb didn't react. Didn't look down. But didn't move away either. That for her was enough. A nurse came through the double doors at the far end of the hallway. She held a chart, brows furrowed. She walked past them without pause. Another 5 minutes passed. June blinked. "Do you think he's awake?" she asked. The question came out soft, more breath than voice. Caleb turned, eyes on her now. "Maybe not yet," he said, "but he's still here." That word, still, landed gently between them. June looked back down on her knees, tracing a faded thread on the sleeve of the jacket with her pinky. "I didn't think he'd make it this far." Caleb didn't reply. He had learned, long ago, that some statements didn't require answers. They required company. They required presence. So he remained there, leaning just enough that the edge of his arm touched hers. Just a little. Just enough to let her know, "I see you." And that, after too long of not being seen, was everything. Inside the sealed room, the world operated on fragments of time no clock could measure. Beats between breaths. Pulses against fingertips, the flicker of green numbers that refused to hold steady. Dr. Parker stood at the head of the infant's bed, his face lit in alternating pulses by the vitals monitor. He wasn't shouting. No one in the room was. This wasn't a battlefield of chaos. It was a fight of precision, of steadiness. And like any soldier under fire, everyone inside that glass-lined room knew their next movement mattered more than their fear. The infant's chest rose unevenly. The oxygen tube was already in, but his skin had not returned to full color. A soft, bluish hue lingered at the lips, a cruel shade between almost and not yet. "Core temperature, 35.2, one nurse called out. "Begin warming protocol. Heated fluids. Full wrap. We're not waiting," Parker responded, voice clipped but calm. A second nurse adjusted the infant's limbs, careful not to disturb the tiny fort taped into place. His body was almost weightless on the table, his hands curled loosely, as if even in sleep. He didn't know how to ask for more. Parker leaned in, his gloved fingers pressing gently against the baby's sternum, counting seconds. "Still bradycardic. We need stimulation." He tapped lightly, rhythmic, like he was knocking on a door somewhere inside the boy's chest. Come back. Come back. Come back." From the hallway, June's eyes were locked onto the scene. The glass between her and the doctor's was pristine, without smudge or fog, as though the room had been built solely for watching without touching. Beside her, Caleb hadn't shifted since they arrived. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, just for a moment, but it felt like an omen. The beeping from the heart monitor dipped. Parker noticed. "Heart rate is falling," a nurse said, too quietly. "Prepare epinephrine," Parker ordered. "And someone notify NICU. If we stabilize, I want him up there immediately." A third nurse moved across the room, swinging open a tray of emergency meds. The smallest vial was chosen. Clear liquid, barely a teaspoon's worth, but its importance could have filled oceans. Parker's hands moved fast now, not rushed, but with the fluency of someone who had done this too many times to guess, and just few enough to still care. The injection slid in. 1 second. 2. The monitor flatlined for half a beat. Then, a blip. 1. Then 2. Not regular, but present. The nurse monitoring vitals lifted her eyes. "We got something." Parker didn't respond. His hand was already on the infant's chest. 2 fingers pressing, releasing, measured compressions. "Don't let go," he muttered under his breath, like a plea disguised as instruction. Outside the glass, June whispered to herself. No one heard it but her. "Don't sleep. Please, don't sleep." It was the same phrase she had murmured in the alley when she first found him. The same rhythm. Only now, there were people to echo the urgency, hands and wires and technology, but the heart of it was the same. "Stay. Just stay." Inside the room, a faint cry pierced the silence. Small, raspy, like a breath remembered after forgetting. Everyone froze. Then the monitor picked up. Beep, beep, beep. Faint, slow, but rising. Parker leaned back for the first time, exhaling through his mask. "We got him." The nurses didn't cheer. This wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter than that. Reverent, like watching something sacred return to life. Parker stepped back. Let the others move in, checking lines, warming pads, O2 flow. Then he glanced toward the window. His eyes met Caleb's for the first time. No signal, just understanding. The kind men exchange when they've stood in rooms where life hangs by threads. And somehow, the thread holds. Caleb let out a slow breath, almost inaudible. Beside him, June's hand tightened on his sleeve, not in fear, but in release, like she'd been holding her breath longer than she realized. "He cried," she whispered. Caleb nodded, voice low. "He did." She leaned against the wall, jacket still wrapped tight around her. She didn't smile, but her shoulders lowered, just slightly, and in that motion was all the hope she had left. The monitor beeped in steady rhythm now. Not perfect, not strong, but reliable. The kind of rhythm that doctors count on and soldiers dream of. Inside the room, the baby lay swaddled in warm blankets, his skin pinking slowly around the cheeks. The 4 lines remained, taped gently along his forearm, but his breathing no longer required prompts. His chest rose and fell, small, honest, unassisted. He'd done the impossible. He had stayed. Dr. Parker hadn't left the room yet. He stood just inside the doorway, arms folded loosely, watching his team finish what had been started, adjusting temperature settings, rechecking vitals, logging timestamps that would never fully explain what happened here. He didn't speak, didn't smile, but something about the tilt of his head suggested gratitude. Not for himself, for the baby, for the moment, for the fact that today they hadn't lost. A nurse adjusted the beanie on the child's head. Pale blue, too big. She rolled the edges until it rested snug around the baby's ears. She looked at him, then turned to Parker. "He's holding steady," she said softly. Parker nodded. "Let's notify NICU. They'll prep for transfer." Outside the glass, June still hadn't moved. Her fingers clutched Caleb's sleeve as if letting go might undo the miracle. But slowly, her body leaned forward. She pressed both hands against the glass, forehead resting gently between them. Her breath fogged the surface again, but this time she didn't back away. Inside, one of the nurses noticed her, and for the first time since all of this began, someone on the other side acknowledged her. The nurse, tall, auburn hair tucked behind her ears, walked to the glass and gave June a simple nod. Not of authority, not permission, just recognition. It made something crack gently open in June's chest. She blinked quickly, then turned her face into Caleb's coat. He didn't ask her to speak, didn't ask her to stop. He just shifted his stance slightly, placing one hand on her back, flat, warm, steady. And for the first time, June let her body lean into his. Not collapsing, not melting, just resting. A child in the presence of someone who wouldn't leave. Somewhere down the hallway, a gurney rolled past. Another case, another patient. Life continued at its indifferent pace. But here, in this hallway corner, time still held reverence. After a while, a nurse opened the door from the emergency wing. She carried a clipboard, but her voice was gentle. "You the ones who brought him in?" Caleb nodded. The nurse looked at June, then back to Caleb. "He's stable now. We'll be transferring him upstairs to NICU for close monitoring. You can come with us, just one adult and her," she added, gesturing toward June. June didn't look up. Caleb lowered his voice, barely above a whisper. "Do you want to go in?" June didn't answer with words. She just nodded once, quick and sure. The nurse held the door open wider. Inside, the room had changed. The lighting had softened. Machines had quieted. The crib was mobile now, fitted with temperature control and transport straps. But the baby, he looked peaceful. Not healed, not whole. But here, Caleb led June gently through the door. She held his coat tight around her, as if it were armor. When she reached the crib, she didn't speak. She simply stared. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. Then, with a tentative motion, she reached out a finger. Not to touch, just to hover above his. The baby moved slightly, his hand curling again, not grasping, just existing. And June, for the first time since this story began, let herself smile. Not a full smile, not loud or bright, just the ghost of one. The kind of smile people only offer after surviving something. She turned her face slightly, eyes finding Caleb's. "He's warm now," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "He is." There was no need to say more. Not in that moment. The nurse prepared the crib for transfer. Caleb stepped back slightly, letting June walk alongside the incubator. As they wheeled the baby through the door, June's hand stayed lightly on the railing. Not gripping, just near, just there. Caleb followed a step behind, his coat still around her shoulders, his presence steady. Outside the emergency wing, the hospital noise returned. Elevators dinged, phones rang, footsteps echoed. But inside that space between doors there was stillness. A stillness born not from silence, but from life choosing quietly and stubbornly to remain. The wheels of the incubator whispered across the tile, quiet and certain. Each soft roll echoed faintly against the beige walls, not unlike the hush of boots on desert dust. Measured, purposeful, no fanfare. June walked beside it, still clutching the edges of Caleb's jacket around her. The sleeves dangled far past her hands, flapping gently with each step. She didn't try to roll them up. There was something comforting in being small inside, something built to protect. A nurse guided the transport. Another push from behind. Their conversation, if it existed, was silent. Gestures and glances, the kind of coordination that came only from people who'd done this before too many times. Caleb followed 3 paces back. He didn't hurry. He didn't lag. He walked like someone who understood the weight of every footstep, who had marched with grief and now marched with something harder, hope. They reached the elevator. The doors opened with a mechanical sigh. One nurse stepped inside with the crib. The other looked at June. "You can ride up with him," she said, voice gentle. June hesitated, then turned to Caleb. Her eyes didn't ask for permission. They asked for presence. Caleb nodded once and placed his hand on the elevator rail, ready to step in. But the nurse paused. "Only one adult," she reminded softly. June froze. She glanced back at the baby, then at Caleb. For a split second, the child in her wavered, unsure which world she belonged to. Caleb didn't flinch. He leaned down just slightly, voice even. "You go." 2 words. Nothing more. June held his gaze, searching for anything unsteady in him. But there was none. So she turned back toward the crib. The doors closed, and Caleb was left in the hallway, alone. He didn't move, didn't sigh. He simply stepped back to the wall, leaned into it, and folded his arms loosely over his chest, like he had earlier, hours ago, when none of them knew whether the baby would make it. A janitor passed by, pushing a mop cart. Caleb nodded. The man nodded back. No questions, no curiosity. Just one man recognizing another who had stayed up too long, cared too much, and carried more than he could explain. Across the hallway, a vending machine buzzed faintly. A child drawing was taped beside it, faded crayon lines of sun and stick figures beneath the words, "Thank you, nurses." Caleb looked at it for a long time, then turned his head slightly toward the elevator, waiting. Minutes passed. He checked his watch once, then slid both hands into his pockets and stared at the floor. Behind him, the door to the emergency wing opened slightly. A nurse leaned out, holding a clipboard. "You still here?" He nodded. She stepped closer, flipping a page. "You're not her father, are you?" "No." "Relative?" "No." The nurse studied him for a beat longer. "She listed you as next of kin." Caleb looked up. "She doesn't have anyone else, does she?" The nurse shrugged, but it wasn't careless. Just truthful. Not on file. She tapped her pen once against the clipboard. "She'll need someone to sign when she's discharged. And the baby, too, once he's cleared for placement." Caleb didn't answer right away. The hallway hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped steadily behind a closed door. "Is she okay?" he asked quietly. The nurse softened. Tired. But she stayed up the whole time. Refused to leave his side. Didn't ask for anything. Caleb nodded, gaze low. The nurse waited another second, then handed him a folded slip. NICU floor. Room 7. If you want to wait there. He took it, but didn't move. The nurse turned and left, shoes squeaking faintly as she disappeared into the next corridor. Caleb unfolded the paper slowly, then tucked it into his chest pocket. Outside, through the hospital windows, the light was beginning to fade. Not quite night. That in-between blue where shadows are soft and everything feels quieter than it is. He stood there still and tall, until someone buzzed through the intercom and called for assistance in another wing. Then finally, slowly, he walked. His boots didn't echo. His coat, missing from his shoulders, felt like a weight he'd laid down for someone else to carry. And he didn't mind. The hallway outside the NICU was quiet in the way only hospitals could be, where silence wasn't emptiness. But the sound of waiting, of watching, of not wanting to disturb whatever fragile thread held everything together. June stood in front of the wide glass panel. Though she hadn't said the words, lay in a clear plastic bassinet warmed by soft yellow light. His chest rose in steady rhythm now, tethered to a few monitors, but no longer buried beneath wires like before. A soft knit cap covered his head. Someone had placed a tiny stuffed bear beside him. Likely standard issue from the ward, a comfort more for the watchers than the watched. June's eyes traced every detail. The way his fingers twitched when he slept, the way his lips parted slightly, and stepped back down the hallway, letting her have the view to herself. June pressed her palm to the glass, fingers splayed. The warmth of it startled her. She pulled back quickly, then placed her hand again, softer this time. It was as if she wanted to reach through, not to touch the baby, but to leave something there, her warmth, her breath, her belonging. Across the room, the nurse tending to the bassinet noticed her. The woman gave a small smile. Not the kind people give when they want to cheer you up, but the kind that says, "Yes, I see you. Yes, he's still here." June nodded. A memory passed through her, uninvited but familiar. It was cold, too cold for a child to sleep outside. She remembered the alley behind the bus station. He didn't speak. He came to stand beside her again, just like before. Their reflections returned to the glass, side by side. "I thought you left," she said, voice small. "I did," he answered. "Then I came back." She nodded. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was shaped like something both had grown used to, like two people sitting on the same bench. Not because they had to talk, but because no one else had stayed. "Will they let me hold him?" she asked after a long pause. Caleb looked through the glass. Eventually, she didn't ask when. She didn't press. "I used to think," she stopped. Shook her head. "What?" June wiped at the glass where her breath had fogged it. "I used to think people were just born unlucky. Like, some of us were meant to be forgotten." Caleb didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Maybe it's not about luck. Maybe it's about who keeps looking for you." She turned to him. Really turned this time. "And you? Did someone keep looking for you?" "No," he said, "I still on the baby. But I kept looking for someone to find." A long silence followed. Then June asked why. Caleb didn't answer, but his hand, weathered and strong, reached up and gently tapped the glass. Once, near the place where June's fingers had been moments ago. Because sometimes he thought, she just stood taller. As if, somehow, the sound gave her back something she'd long buried. The right to be here. The right to feel love. The right to become someone who stayed. The rain had come soft, almost apologetically, as if it, too, didn't want to be loud that night. It wasn't heavy enough to soak, but enough to blur the edges of things, the yellow glow of the street lamps, the outlines of parked cars, the worn white lines on asphalt that no longer remembered their shape. Caleb stood by the truck, not in it, not opening the door, just there, the same way he'd stood outside mud-walled homes overseas, the same way he used to wait for orders that never came. Still, listening to nothing and everything. The parking lot behind the hospital was mostly empty now. Visiting hours had passed. The building behind him seemed to exhale in low hums, fluorescence buzzing, vents groaning, a world continuing in spite of what each room held. He reached for his keys, then paused. The ring felt cold, lifeless in his palm. He clenched it loosely and let it dangle beside his leg. The truck had sat in that spot all day, unmoved. He hadn't fed the meter, hadn't left a note, but no one had ticketed it. Maybe someone had looked out a window, seen the uniform jacket on the dash, and decided not to interrupt whatever mission they imagined he was on. He wasn't on a mission. He didn't even know what to call it. He had meant to drop off some paperwork at the VA center that morning. That was it. A routine visit. A form that needed a signature. A Tuesday task. Then he saw her. The girl. June. Curled by the trash bins in front of the ER entrance, her fists around a bundled baby, eyes wide but silent. She hadn't cried. Not like the others he'd seen. She hadn't asked for help. Just looked. And something in that look had grabbed the collar of his conscience and refused to let go. He opened the truck door now, slow. Inside, the cab smelled like old coffee and leather, worn through with time and road dust. His thermos still sat in the cup holder, the top slightly ajar. He didn't drink from it, just held it for a moment, letting the metal warm his palm before setting it back down. His jacket was gone, of course, still with her. She hadn't taken it off when she followed the baby up to the NICU. Hadn't even noticed she was still wearing it. Or maybe she had. Maybe she knew it was his and that he hadn't asked for it back. Maybe that was the point. Maybe she was waiting to see if he would. He leaned back against the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. Rain tapped soft against the windshield. In the rear view, the red letters of the hospital sign glowed faint through mist. He remembered another rain, years ago, not in this state, not even in this country. He remembered a boy named Torres, holding his breath behind a Humvee while artillery rumbled in the distance. They'd waited out the storm by sharing a bag of sunflower seeds, cracking them one by one, shells falling to the floor like hushed confessions. Torres didn't make a home, but Caleb had. And some nights, that truth sat heavier than any rucksack. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, not to cry, just to hold everything still for a moment. Then let go. June was probably still sitting beside that bassinet. Maybe asleep now. Maybe watching the baby breathe with the same cautious hope she had held when standing behind the glass. She had asked earlier, "Will they let me keep him?" He hadn't known how to answer. She wasn't old enough to sign papers. Wasn't related. Wasn't anything on paper except a minor with no record and no listed guardian. Inside was a faded envelope, creases soft with time. His discharge letter folded around a Polaroid of his old team, all lined up in the mess tent, smiling like they believed they'd make it back whole. Only two of them had, and neither talked much anymore. He stared at the photo, then tucked it back. Outside, the rain began to thin, slowing to mist. In his side mirror, a nurse stepped out the main entrance for a smoke break, her shoulders hunched against the chill. A second later, she spotted his truck, stare a moment, then lit her cigarette and looked away. He reached for the gear shift, stopped, then turned the engine off, stepped out, locked the door, and walked back toward the hospital. The waiting room just outside the NICU was dimly lit, more gray than warm, with old magazines splayed across low tables and vinyl chairs that squeaked if you shifted too much. The kind of space that didn't ask you to feel better, just to stay quiet and maybe sit down for a while. Caleb took the seat by the window. He didn't say anything. June came in a minute later, slowly, like someone unsure if they were allowed. Her boots left small marks on the wet tile. His jacket still hung off her shoulders like borrowed armor. She didn't meet his eyes, but she didn't avoid them either. She just sat, one chair apart. A vending machine hummed in the far corner. Someone had left a half-drunk cup of coffee on the windowsill, its surface gone still. On the opposite wall, a paper sign flapped under the vent's breath, for families only. No one asked who they were, and no one came in. Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms folded loosely across his chest. June pulled her knees up, feet barely brushing the floor. They sat like that for a while. Two strangers joined by a baby neither of them had expected to still be alive. "You came back," she said at last. He nodded. Wasn't far. A silence fell again. Not awkward. Not quite. More like the kind you hear between verses of a hymn, when the air holds its breath to make room for something sacred. "I didn't think anyone would stay," she added, after a moment. "I didn't think I would either," Caleb said. She glanced at him, just briefly, then looked down at her hands. The hospital band still clung to her wrist from triage. Her fingers fidgeted with the plastic edge. It made a soft click each time it turned. "I'm not really his mom," she whispered. Caleb turned toward her. "He's not really mine either," he answered. June gave a small, sad smile. "I mean, I was just holding him. That night. That's all. Just trying to keep him warm." Caleb didn't correct her. Didn't tell her that holding someone was everything. That warmth was half the battle. He let her talk. I thought if I stayed still enough, if I curled around him like they do in those animal shows, like wolves or whatever, he'd stop shaking. But he didn't. Not really. He just kind of stayed. She paused. That was enough, he said. Her head turned just slightly. Enough for her hair to fall from her face. You think so? Ido. She looked away again, bit the inside of her cheek. You been in the army long? She asked, after another stretch of quiet. Long enough. He didn't elaborate. Didn't tell her about Iraq. Or on the church steps. I'd count in hours, mostly. Longest was 2 days. Caleb looked at her now. And tonight, she shrugged. You're still here. He didn't say anything. Just sat a little deeper into the chair. Outside the window, the rain had fully stopped. The sky hadn't cleared, but there was a dull glow above the horizon. Street lamp or dawn. It was hard to tell. I don't have anyone, she said. I know. No mum. No that. No. Plan. He nodded. I don't either. She glanced at him again. You're a grown-up, she said, like it should have made him immune. I'm a soldier, he replied. We learned to pack light. Her eyes stayed on him a second longer this time. Do you think I can keep him? She asked. Her voice was smaller now. Not frightened. Just very far away. Caleb didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Then said, I think he already belongs to you. She blinked, but no tears came. She wasn't built that way. Not anymore. Then I guess I should start learning how to stay, she whispered. Caleb nodded. That's the hardest part, and maybe the most important. They didn't move for a while after that. Just sat, close enough for warmth, far enough for space. Not family, not yet, but something forming, slowly, like dawn under a sky that hadn't quite decided to break. The fluorescent lights in the waiting room didn't dim at night. They simply existed. A constant, soft buzzing above, like a reminder that sleep wasn't the point here. People didn't come to these rooms to rest. They came to endure. June had curled up in the chair next to his, legs tucked under, head tilted against the armrest. Caleb could hear her breath slow, uneven at first, then settling into a rhythm like wind through half-shut blinds. Not deep sleep, but the kind that comes when the body can't keep holding up its own weight. She still wore his jacket. It had slipped halfway down her shoulder. He thought about fixing it, but didn't. She wasn't cold. Not really. Just small. Caleb sat without moving. He kept his arms folded, fingers resting near the zipper of his hoodie. His boots were muddy from earlier, and he could feel the crusted grit drying beneath the soles. Still, he didn't shift. He didn't want to wake her. Or worse, remind her she wasn't safe. Because right now, somehow she was in this gray-lit room with broken chairs and a dying fern by the exit sign. She was safe. He watched the clock tick past 2:17. Then 2:32. He didn't check his phone. Didn't want to read texts from the VA or the 2 missed calls from someone he hadn't talked to in 6 months. He didn't want to read news or headlines or updates. The only update that mattered was 1 floor up behind sterile glass and humming machines, where a baby breathed because somehow life had chosen to stay. Every so often, the hallway filled with the low rattle of a cart or the soft murmur of nurses trading shifts. Their voices stayed respectful, almost reverent, like people who understood that this hour belonged to the quiet ones. June stirred once. Her fingers twitched near her face, like chasing something in a dream. She mumbled a word he didn't catch, then sank back into stillness. Caleb's hand, by instinct, hovered halfway up, then fell. Let her sleep. That was the mission tonight. Not saving the world. Every imperfection felt honest. There was no need to pretend here. He thought about Afghanistan, about the burned pits, about the smell of diesel and blood and sand baked into sweat. He thought about the good days, too, the ones with music from someone's old speaker, a shared deck of cards, laughter that lasted just long enough to remember being human. He hadn't expected to feel anything like that again. But tonight, something stirred. Not joy, not exactly, but peace. The kind you earn, not stumble into, the kind that grows from doing the right thing, even when you don't know why. June shifted again, curling tighter. He slid his jacket hood under her head, careful not to wake her. In the corner, the vending machine flickered. He rose slowly, letting each footstep fall soft. From the machine, he bought a bottle of water and a small bag of trail mix, then sat back down. She'd probably be hungry in the morning. Or maybe not. Maybe she'd wake up and bolt. Maybe she'd remember the dozens of times someone said, "I'll be right back," and didn't mean it. But Caleb wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. He leaned back into the chair, eyes closing, not asleep, just resting. Outside the hospital windows, the first faint blue of dawn pressed against the night. The kind of morning that doesn't announce itself, just arrives, quietly, softly, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping child. The morning didn't feel like morning. It was just a change in light, from pale blue to something more clinical, sharper. The waiting room, unchanged overnight, now looked harsher, the edges more visible, the dust more obvious. A place that had tolerated their presence was now remembering it had rules. June was already sitting up. She hadn't spoken yet. Her hair was tangled on one side, and the collar of Caleb's jacket had fallen back behind her shoulder. She blinked a few times, rubbing her palms over her jeans, like trying to scrub off the night. Caleb handed her the bottle of water. She nodded once. Quiet thanks. They hadn't spoken since the vending machine hummed the night before. He stood, stretched slightly, then sat back down. The chairs groaned beneath the shift of weight. At 7:10, a nurse came through. Short, blonde, tired in the way only hospital workers could be. Her badge read Lisa. She looked at them both with a kind of expression that was neither unkind nor inviting. Just exhausted protocol. Are you with the baby in NICU room 7? Caleb nodded. We are. She paused at that. The we hung in the air longer than it needed to. Lisa gave a small, practiced smile. Social worker will be up shortly. We'll need to speak to the guardian. Or next of kin. Caleb glanced at June. June stared straight ahead. Lisa followed his eyes. She's a minor, she said, not unkindly but firmly. We'll need an adult to speak with. I'm here, Caleb replied. Lisa didn't nod, didn't argue, just made a note on her clipboard and walked away. That was how it started. 15 minutes later, they were in a small office on the 3rd floor. Beige walls, a dusty plant in the corner, and a desk cluttered with folders that had names printed in all caps and red flags marked on sticky notes. Across from them sat a woman in a navy cardigan and glasses too large for her face. Her name was Nancy. Nancy smiled the way a person smiles when they know they're about to say no. So, she began, you found the baby outside the ER entrance? Caleb nodded. Nancy looked at June. And you were holding him? June said nothing, just nodded once. Nancy made a note. Can I ask how long you've known each other? Since yesterday, Caleb said. Nancy didn't look up from her clipboard. And your relationship to the child? We don't know his name, Caleb answered. I see, she said. There was no judgment in her tone. But there was something else, weariness, maybe, a kind of administrative disbelief. Caleb leaned forward, hands on his knees. He was left in the cold. She kept him warm. I brought them both in. That's what happened. Nancy looked up. I believe you. Then she added, but belief isn't paperwork. She pulled a form from the stack, slid it across the table. This is a temporary custody request form. If the mother isn't found within 72 hours, and if neither of you has legal guardianship, the baby becomes a ward of the state. June sat up straighter. But he was with me. Nancy raised a hand gently. Sweetheart, I know. But that's not enough. Not legally. Caleb exhaled slowly. What are the options? Well, Nancy said, if either of you wants to petition for temporary care, we can start that process. But it's not quick, and not easy, and frankly, the court will want stability. She looked at June again, then at Caleb. Your military? Former. Discharge papers? Yeah. She nodded, marking another box. Do you have any prior child welfare involvement? Foster record? Arrests? No. She nodded again. June was still holding her breath. Nancy turned to her. And you, June? Do you have a guardian? A parent? June's face didn't move. Caleb answered for her. She's alone. Nancy sighed, not from annoyance, just sadness. That complicates things. Silence returned. The room, once filled with the soft rustle of paper, now felt like it was holding its breath with them. Nancy leaned back in her chair. I've seen people walk away from less, she said quietly. Caleb didn't move. June didn't blink. I'm not walking, he said. Nancy looked at him longer this time. There'll be visits, checks, backgrounds, maybe court. You'll have to provide a home address. Income verification, stability. I can manage that. What about her? Nancy asked, motioning to June. She'll need someone to advocate, to vouch. I'll vouch, Caleb said. Nancy stared at him, then slowly nodded. I'll start the process. The hospital doors whooshed open without ceremony, letting in a blast of air that tasted like old snow and car exhaust. It wasn't quite winter, but the cold had settled in early this year, quiet and lasting, like someone who doesn't plan to leave anytime soon. Caleb stepped out first, the paperwork tucked beneath his arm, still warm from the copier. June followed, arms wrapped around her middle, even though she was still wearing his jacket. They didn't say much. The world outside the hospital was louder than it should have been. Honks from a nearby intersection, the low hum of a garbage truck idling. A woman yelling into her phone across the parking lot. Life unbothered. It took a few seconds for their eyes to adjust, and longer for their hearts. Caleb's truck was parked at the far end of the lot, not because there weren't spots closer, but because he didn't like crowding, didn't like squeezing into places he didn't know he'd be welcome. They walked slow, not from exhaustion, though they were both tired in the bones, but from something else, a reluctance to move too quickly through a moment that might never come again. June held the baby now. He was swaddled in a navy blanket the NICU nurse had handed off just before they left, tucked carefully into the curve of her arms like a word not yet spoken. "He's heavier than he looks," she whispered. Caleb didn't answer, just nodded. He knew what that meant. The emotional weight of holding something fragile, someone who needs you before you even know what that means. At the truck, he opened the passenger door and helped her in carefully, easing the baby onto her lap as she adjusted the blanket. Then he walked around and slid into the driver's seat. The truck groaned when it started, reluctant like the rest of them. He didn't pull out right away, just sat there, one hand on the steering wheel, the other gripping the folder on his lap. 32 pages of forms, waivers, declarations, and warnings. None of them said what mattered. None of them could capture the way June had held the baby all night, or how she'd looked at Nancy, the social worker, without blinking, or the silence between them on the third floor when neither of them had walked away. He glanced at her now. She was staring out the window, lips pressed thin, brow furrowed, not in fear but focus. The kind you see on people who've had to grow up inside themselves too fast. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded once. "I think so." Then after a pause, "Are you?" Caleb looked straight ahead. "Not yet." June didn't ask what he meant, didn't ask what he thought he would be. Some things he didn't press on. Some healing needs air, not answers. The baby made a small sound then, a hiccup, or maybe a sigh. June adjusted his blanket again, fingers gentle. Caleb watched her hands for a moment. Steady, present, already learning. Then he reached down and turned the key again. The engine caught this time, settling into a low rumble. He pulled out of the lot. They passed a gas station with a flickering sign, a used tire shop with its door half open, and a line of early commuters already lining up at the light. The world had moved on. But in the cab of that old truck, something had slowed. Some promise unspoken. He didn't say, "I'll take care of you." She didn't say, "Don't leave me." But somewhere in the space between those unsaid things, the vow had been made. Not to stay forever. Not yet. But to try. To not disappear before breakfast. To not pretend the past didn't exist. To not walk away, just because the road ahead had no map. And for now, that was enough. The gravel crunched under the weight of the truck as Caleb turned into the narrow driveway. The house stood just as he had left it, silent, weathered, leaning slightly toward the east like it, too. Was tired of standing. The porch steps creaked in protest. The paint on the front door had long since surrendered, flaking away to reveal the gray wood beneath. One shutter hung crooked. A wind chime made from old spoons stirred gently in the breeze, a soft metallic whisper greeting no one in particular. Caleb didn't apologize for the state of it. He simply said, "It's home," and unlocked the door. The inside smelled like dry wood and time. Dust floated in the light cutting through half-closed blinds. A couch with sun-faded arms sat under a window that hadn't opened in months. The kitchen counters were clean, but bare, like someone had started over and hadn't decided what to keep yet. June hesitated at the threshold, baby still in her arms. She didn't ask where to put him, didn't ask if there was a room for her. Just stood there, quietly reading the place like a new language. Caleb walked ahead, dropping his keys onto the hook shaped like a fish by the door. He opened a window, then another. The air moved slowly at first, dragging its feet like a reluctant guest. "You can sit," he said, nodding toward the couch. June did. The baby stirred. Not a cry, just a rustle. His face scrunched, then settled. Caleb disappeared into a hallway and returned with a folded blanket and a small pillow, one with a faded baseball pattern, clearly once a child's. "This okay?" he asked. June nodded. "It's perfect." She laid the baby down gently, her hand still resting lightly on his chest, as if afraid he might vanish. In the kitchen, Caleb opened cabinets, pulled down a pan, filled it with water. He moved like someone remembering how to live. The eggs in the fridge were a week from expiration. He boiled them anyway. No toast. No bater. Just eggs and salt in a chipped bowl. He handed her like an offering. June peeled one slowly, offering half to Caleb. He shook his head. You eat. They ate in silence. The kind that didn't need filling. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, pushing the loose shutter against the siding with a gentle thud, thud, thud. I used to have a dog, Caleb said suddenly. Before I deployed. What was his name? Murphy. Named after a guy I served with. Where is he now? Caleb paused. Died while I was gone. June didn't say sorry. She just nodded. Like someone who understood that some losses don't get fixed. They get folded into you. Later, Caleb rummaged through the attic and found an old bassinet. The legs wobbled, and the paint had chipped away in corners, but it held steady. He dusted it off and brought it down, setting it next to the couch. That used to be my nephew's, he said. June didn't ask where the nephew was now. Some stories didn't need telling. Not yet. That night, they didn't have much, a couch, a bassinet, a couple of clean towels. But the baby slept. June slept, eventually, curled on the couch, her arm falling gently across the edge of the bassinet, like she was anchoring herself to something real. Caleb took the armchair across from him, boots still on, one eye open. The house made all the old noises it used to, pipes groaning, wood settling, a branch tapping the roof. But this time they didn't sound lonely, just lived in. At some point past midnight, the baby whimpered. Caleb was up before June. He changed the diaper awkwardly on the kitchen table, his hands too big for the snaps, but careful. The baby didn't cry again. Afterward, he stood over the sink, rinsing his hands under lukewarm water, watching the quiet house behind him through the reflection in the window pane. He didn't know how long they'd stay. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, lawyers, court visits, or just more eggs and soft lullabies. But for tonight, under this roof, they weren't strangers anymore. There was something else. Not yet a family, but not alone either. And that, somehow, was enough to keep the lights on. The morning began with coffee that tasted like dust and cardboard. Caleb stirred it twice, took a sip, grimaced, and drank it anyway. The house was quiet in the way homes get after a hard night, like even the walls were catching their breath. June was still sleeping on the couch, curled on her side, one hand draped protectively over the bassinet. The baby, who still didn't have a name, was wrapped in the same navy blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. There was no television noise, no radio playing, just the creak of floorboards and the slow hum of an old refrigerator that had survived more decades than Caleb had. He liked the silence. It felt earned. Outside, the morning sun filtered through the branches of cottonwood, drawing slow shadows on the front porch. Then came the knock. 3 raps. Not loud, but official. Caleb froze for half a second, then walked to the front door. He didn't ask who. Something about the rhythm of it told him. This wasn't a neighbor. This was someone who had driven here with a reason. He opened the door. He nodded. She offered a card without stepping forward. Melinda Caro, Department of Child Welfare. May I come in? Caleb stepped aside. Inside, she paused, just for a second, taking in the small living room, the worn couch, the baby sleeping in the bassinet. She didn't speak right away. Didn't move toward June, who had just stirred awake. Blinking, confused, Melinda nodded once, like acknowledging something without saying it. You got them out fast, she said, almost to herself. Caleb said nothing. Melinda pulled a document from her folder, handed it to him. I'm here to do a home evaluation. He glanced at the top of the page. Preliminary placement review. Temporary custody petition pending. Caleb rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper. I wasn't told anyone was coming today. Surprise is part of the point. She replied. We look at how you live when you're not expecting to be looked at. She said it without threat. Just fact. Caleb gestured toward the small kitchen table. You want to sit? She did. June sat too, across from her, arms wrapped tight around herself. She looked smaller in daylight. Younger. Melinda opened her folder again. I've read the hospital report, the nurse's statement, the intake file from Nancy Shore. You stepped in. You brought the baby in. You've provided shelter, clothing, food. She looked up. That's a lot to do in 3 days. Caleb met her gaze. Seemed like the thing to do. Most people don't. He didn't answer. Melinda turned a page. No prior child welfare cases. Military background. Honorable discharge. No record. House is under your name. Paid in full. Utilities current. No visible hacerse. She looked around again. No querib. Caleb motioned to the bassinet. That's what I have. Melinda nodded. No formula. We've been using what the hospital gave us, which runs out tonight. I know. She made another note. June was watching her now, carefully, as if trying to read between lines that hadn't been written yet. Melinda turned to her. June, is that your real name? The girl nodded. Last name, Rowan. Date of birth. June hesitated. Then, October 3rd, 2012. You're 13. Almost. Do you have any legal guardian? No. No living parents? No one I know of. Melinda looked at Caleb again. Do you know where she was staying before? I didn't ask. Why? He shrugged. Didn't matter. That made her pause. Then she closed the folder gently. You're not wrong, she said. But the system doesn't like loose ends. She looked around again, this time not as an official, but as someone trying to see more than furniture and drywall. This house is old, she said. Yeah. You live here alone? Since my brother died. Melinda studied him. Then, softer, and now you don't. He didn't respond. Outside, a bird landed on the porch rail. It pecked at nothing, then flew off. Melinda leaned forward. You understand what this means, don't you? If you go forward with this petition, you're not just babysitting. You're asking to become their legal guardian. 2 children, one an infant, the other with no papers, no school enrollment, no medical history, no backup plan. Caleb nodded. I know. She let silence stretch. What if the baby's mother shows up? I'll hand him over. And if she doesn't, I'll raise him. Melinda didn't blink. You're not married. You have no parenting history. You live off a VA pension and some odd carpentry jobs. Caleb waited. You sure? I didn't knock on his door, Caleb said quietly. He knocked on mine. That landed. Melinda looked at June. You want to stay here? June nodded. Why? The girl didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, because no one's asked me to leave yet. Melinda sat back, wrote something, then closed the folder and stood. I'll file the update. That's it, for now. She walked to the door, opened it, then turned back. I've been doing this job for 18 years, she said, and I've learned to stop hoping. But today, she didn't finish the sentence. She just stepped out into the morning light. The door closed behind her. Caleb stood still for a moment, staring at the handle like it might move again. June walked over, looked out the window. She doesn't smile much. No, Caleb agreed. But I think she wanted to. He nodded. Then, without needing to say it, they both turned, back toward the baby, toward the quiet of the house. Toward the part of the day where things are not decided by paper, but by what happens when no one is watching. The house had settled into a rhythm. Not the kind of rhythm that came with plans, or calendars, or school pickups, but the quiet, instinctive kind. The one that forms when 3 people move around each other enough times that something unspoken begins to hold. Mornings began with eggs. Sometimes oatmeal. Sometimes toast. If Caleb remembered to buy bread. The baby, still nameless, woke every few hours, demanding milk with tiny fists and red-cheeked cries. June learned to hold him against her chest just right, the way the nurses had taught her. Caleb got better at diaper changes, though his fingers still fumbled with the tabs. The bassinet had been moved closer to the window now. Light hit it soft in the morning, enough to warm the blanket without waking him. They hadn't talked about names. Not once. It was as if naming him would mean owning something neither of them were ready to hold. June never asked who his mother was. Caleb never speculated. They knew that too many words might undo the small piece they'd stitched together with gestures. Peeling fruit, folding tiny clothes, fixing the crooked leg on the bassinet. But one afternoon, as wind leaned against the porch and clouds shifted low and blue above the trees, the silence found its crack. It began with a laugh. The baby had one of those unsteady, sudden giggles, the kind that sneaks up behind its own breath. June had just tickled the bottom of his foot. The sound escaped him like a surprise. Caleb looked up from the kitchen sink, water running. Soap suds on his fingers. You hear that? June grinned. He's finally getting loud. The baby kicked again, face scrunched into a wide, gummy smile. Caleb dried his hands and walked over. Crouching beside the makeshift playmat they'd fashioned from 2 old quilts and a worn flannel sheet. He's gonna need a name, he said. June's smile faltered. Yeah, she whispered. Neither spoke for a while. The baby squirmed, arms flailing, his eyes bright and unfocused, but searching. What about Jesse? Caleb offered. June tilted her head. Too gentle. Matthew? She shook her head. Feels too someone else's. Caleb sat back on his heels. Well, what then? June looked at the baby. Looked hard. as if the answer might be in the soft curve of his cheek or the way his fingers grasped at air. Then she said, "River." Caleb blinked. "River? Yeah. Why?" June shrugged. "Because he just keeps going, even when no one's watching, like he's carrying things forward." Caleb let the name settle in the room. Let it echo against the cabinets and across the hardwood floor. Let it pass through the worn curtains and rest near the old clock that hadn't ticked in weeks. "River," he said again. The baby kicked his legs in rhythm, as if the sound reached him somewhere inside. Caleb nodded. "River it is." And just like that, the house tilted. Slightly, but enough to feel. It was no longer just a place with 3 people. It had someone named. That night, as rain whispered down against the windows, June folded laundry on the couch, matching tiny socks and rolling up onesies into neat bundles. Caleb stood at the doorway to the kitchen, watching. "You ever think," he began, "that this wasn't supposed to happen?" June looked up. "Which part?" "All of it," she considered. Then, "Maybe. But what?" "Also think maybe it was." Caleb didn't respond. The baby stirred in his bassinet. A soft whimper. Not quite a cry. June walked over, lifted him gently, cradled him against her shoulder. "River," she whispered, rocking slightly. Caleb watched her. He remembered the sandstorms, the tents, the way silence fell like a hammer in the middle of night watches overseas. He remembered not knowing what he was guarding anymore. But here, watching June hold a child they'd found, not claimed, he knew. This was what he'd been guarding. Not just life, but the right to try again. The right to gather broken things and hold them like they still mattered. Outside, the rain thickened. The porch creaked under the weight of wind. Inside, the lights were low. The heater groaned once, then hummed. River slept in June's arms. Caleb sat beside her, not touching, just close enough to feel the gravity of it. He didn't say thank you. She didn't say you're welcome. But something passed between them, weightless and warm. A wordless kind of vow. Tomorrow, there would be more paperwork, more meetings, maybe more people asking questions. But tonight, in a house with creaky pipes and soft shadows, a boy had a name. And 2 people who didn't know they could be anything to each other had just stepped one word closer. It was the kind of morning that carried no sound. No wind. No Volkswagen. Even the old oak by the gate stood still, like it too had paused to listen. Caleb opened the screen door with a quiet creak, stepping onto the porch with River in his arms. The boy was bundled tight, a soft cotton cap pulled over his ears. The blue of the sky hadn't fully arrived yet. It was still the hour where everything wore the color of waiting. "Ready," Caleb whispered, more to himself than to the baby. River blinked once, heavy-lidded. Then he nestled deeper into the blanket. The jacket Caleb held wasn't meant for a child. It was his own from deployment, faded, the Velcro patches long gone, a few stains that never washed out. But he draped it across the infant anyway, folded over twice, the sleeves tucked in like wings. It wasn't about warmth. It was about shelter. He stepped off the porch. June watched from the window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She didn't follow, didn't ask where he was going. She knew this wasn't a journey of errands. This was something else. Caleb walked slowly down the gravel path. His boots crunched with the steady rhythm of someone reacquainting themselves with ground that hadn't been walked in a while. Not like this, anyway. Not with someone fragile in their arms. The town was waking up around the edges. A truck rumbled in the distance. A mailbox opened and closed. Somewhere, a screen door slammed. But where Caleb walked, the world stayed still. He didn't go far. Just to the old bench by the bus stop 2 blocks down. The one where he used to wait for his brother after school when they were boys. The paint was peeling now. One leg was shorter than the rest, so it wobbled a bit when he sat. He lowered himself slowly, careful not to jostle River. The baby made a soft cooing sound, the kind that settled in your chest and made the air around you feel warmer. Caleb stared ahead, at nothing in particular, just the edge of town where trees started up again and the dirt turned red in spring. The clouds moved slow above the water tower. A flag hung still against the pole. He remembered sitting here years ago, boots muddy from basic training, duffel at his feet, and a letter from his father folded tight in his back pocket. Now, there was no letter, no one waiting, just him and the boy. River shifted in his arms, small fists stretching beneath the army jacket. Caleb looked down. "You're not mine," he murmured. The baby blinked, then yawned. "But I'm here anyway." He didn't expect an answer, didn't want one. This wasn't about words. It was about being. He adjusted the jacket again, smoothing it over the infant's chest. It swallowed him whole, the sleeves like curled branches, the faded patch above the pocket barely readable heart. Your name ain't Heart, Caleb whispered. But maybe one day it could be. He didn't know where that thought had come from. It startled him, but he didn't take it back. A woman walked past with her groceries, gave him a glance, then did a double take at the sight of the baby in uniform fabric. Cute coat, she said gently. Caleb nodded. It'd seen a few things. She smiled and walked on. That was all. But something about it made Caleb breathe differently. Less like surviving, more like arriving. He sat there another 20 minutes. Maybe more. Let the sun rise fully over the town. Watched the light shift on River's cheeks, the soft curve of his nose catching warmth like it had been waiting all along. Eventually, River stirred again. A soft whimper. The kind that meant he'd be hungry soon. Caleb stood, slowly, knees popping. He adjusted the jacket once more, then turned and walked back up the gravel path toward home. The porch looked different now. Not because it had changed, but because he had. June opened the door before he reached the top step. You were gone a while. Not long, Caleb said. She glanced at River. He looks warm. Too warm, Caleb said, and peeled the jacket off, revealing the soft onesie underneath. But it was more for me, I think. She didn't ask what he meant. Didn't need to. She stepped aside, and they entered the house together. Inside, the baby fussed. Caleb handed him to June and went to the kitchen to warm a bottle. His fingers moved differently now, still careful, still slow, but with the kind of ease that only comes when a man begins to believe something might be his to protect. June settled onto the couch. River tucked close, her hand gently patting his back. When Caleb returned, she looked up. Did you feel different out there? He nodded. Yeah. Ow. He handed her the bottle, then sat across from her, elbows on knees. I think, he said, the world looked smaller. Smaller? He nodded. Not because it changed, just because I was finally part of it. They sat in silence for a long time. The kind that doesn't ache. The kind that holds. June didn't sleep much anymore. Not because of the baby, though River still woke at odd hours, fussing until warm milk or a familiar hum calmed him down, but because her body hadn't yet relearned what safety felt like. Sleep didn't come easy to those who'd once been told not to get too comfortable. She'd lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling Caleb still hadn't fixed, counting the cracks in the plaster. Some nights, she'd count backward from 50. Others, she'd match her breathing to River's. Inhale, exhale, pause. The child slept in a room next to hers now. He no longer needed to be beside her every night, but she still left the door cracked open, just in case. Caleb was usually up before dawn, taking the trash out, chopping wood, folding laundry that June had left half-finished on the line. They never spoke much in the mornings. They didn't need to. But one morning, before the sun came up, June dreamt. And in that dream, the hallway light was flickering. The house was the same, but also not. Caleb was in uniform again. Not fatigues, but full dress blues, standing at the doorway, a duffel at his feet. Looking older somehow, like time had been unkind. She reached out in the dream, tried to grab his sleeve, but her fingers passed through him like mist. You're leaving? She whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded once. Eyes soft. Final. The baby cried somewhere behind her, but when she turned, the crib was empty. She woke up with tears on her cheek. River was fine, curled in his blanket, breathing slow. Caleb was outside, splitting wood. The axe thudded with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Later that morning, as River napped and sunlight filtered across the floor in long, golden bars, she sat on the couch with a threadbare blanket across her knees. Caleb brought her a mug of warm milk without asking. You okay? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. I had a dream, she said. He waited. You were leaving. He didn't say anything. I tried to stop you, she continued. But you weren't really there. He sipped his coffee. And the baby? Gone, she said. Just gone. They sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that pushes against your ribs from the inside. Then Caleb said, You ever think about what comes next? June looked at him. Next? Yeah. Like tomorrow? No. Like years. She exhaled through her nose. I don't know if I get to think that far ahead. Caleb nodded. Me neither. Not really. River stirred in the next room. A soft coo. Then silence. I think, she said finally, I'd like to stay. Caleb looked up. I mean, if River needs me. I'd like to stay. She didn't look at him as she said it. Just stared into the mug cupped in her hands. The words were heavy, not in weight but in cost. For someone like June, choosing to stay was more terrifying than being asked to leave. Because staying meant she had something to lose. Caleb nodded. He didn't smile, didn't reassure. He just said, okay, that was enough. That night, as the house creaked into darkness, June crept into River's room and stood over his crib. His arms were flung out to either side, small chest rising and falling like he'd known nothing but peace. She bent down, brushed a hair from his forehead, and whispered, I'm here. Just 2 words, but they rang louder in that small room than anything she'd ever screamed in her life. It began the way most quiet miracles do. Not with thunder, not with trumpets, just a single, ordinary morning, the kind people forget to write about. The sun broke through the kitchen window first, spilling across the worn tiles in lazy slants. The smell of coffee was already in the air, the soft hiss of the pot slowing into its final sputter. June sat at the table, hunched over a bowl of cereal she wasn't eating, her elbow resting on a newspaper she couldn't afford to subscribe to. Caleb was at the sink, sleeves rolled, cleaning the bottle from River's midnight feeding. Outside, the wind pushed gently against the old screen door, its hinges giving that familiar tired squeak every now and then, like it, too, was waking slowly. River was on a blanket in the living room, just a few feet away, nestled between 2 cushions June had laid out, one floral, one faded plaid. He kicked at the air, gums showing in the half-open curiosity of babies, his fingers twitching at the dust motes dancing above him in the sunlight. That's when it happened. It wasn't the first time he'd smiled, but it was the first time it felt full, like something more than reflex, like his face finally understood what it meant to be here to belong. June didn't see it at first, but Caleb did. From the sink, he turned just in time to catch River's mouth curling into something pure and wide and new. Not because he was being tickled, not because anyone was prompting him, just because. Caleb dried his hands on a dish towel, walked over, knelt. River looked up at him, eyes wide, mouth still open in that impossible little arc, and gave a soft, bubbling giggle. Caleb blinked. June, he said quietly. She looked over her shoulder. Yeah. Come here. She stood, walked over, cereal forgotten. When she saw it, her breath caught. Oh, she whispered. River looked at her next, and giggled again, this time louder, joyful, round, like the room itself had made him happy. Caleb sat back on his heels. Would you look at that? June crouched beside him. One hand pressed her chest. He's laughing, she murmured, almost like she didn't believe it. Yeah, Caleb said. He is. The 3 of them stayed there a while. No one spoke. River kept laughing. Not nonstop, but enough. Enough to make the morning brighter than it had any right to be. After a while, June reached for her phone. Don't, Caleb said gently. She paused. Just, let be real, he said. She nodded and slipped it back in her pocket. Outside, a truck passed. Someone's dog barked twice. The world moved on, oblivious. But inside the small house, with the creaky floorboards and mismatched curtains, a baby had laughed, and 2 people who didn't think they were capable of building anything had begun to believe otherwise. Later, June took River into her arms and swayed slowly by the window. Caleb poured another cup of coffee and leaned against the doorframe, watching them. You know, she said, voice soft, I think he knows. Knows what? That we're staying. Caleb didn't reply right away. Then, yeah, I think he does. June looked down at the boy in her arms. He looks like he trusts us. Caleb chuckled under his breath. That's dangerous. She smiled. Maybe, but maybe it's also what makes us better. River shifted in her arms, settling his cheek against her collarbone, tiny fingers curling into the fabric of her shirt. Caleb watched the 2 of them. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something deeper. A quiet vow forming not in words, but in muscle and blood and breath. He didn't need a courtroom to say it. Didn't need signatures or seals. He just knew. I'll stay. That afternoon, they walked to the edge of town. Not for groceries. Not because they had to. Just because the sky was blue and the road stretched ahead like it had finally made space for them. River rode in a second-hand stroller Caleb had fixed up from the thrift store. June pushed, humming something soft. Caleb walked beside her, hands in his pockets, every few steps glancing at the boy like he still couldn't quite believe he was real. At the edge of the road, there was an old wooden sign that read, You are now leaving Bell Creek. Come back soon. They stood there a moment, then turned around, walked back home. The next days would still be hard. Money was still tight. The past still whispered at night. But now they had something the war, the courts, and the empty years before hadn't taken. Laughter, and a simple, Holy fact of 3 people choosing each other, even when they didn't have to. River laughed again that night, just before falling asleep. And June whispered into his ear, as soft as the breath between prayers. "We're here, baby. We're not going anywhere." And this time, Caleb believed it. Not every war leaves shrapnel. Some just leave silence. Long, stubborn silence between people who didn't mean to love each other, but did anyway. In a small house, with a baby who giggles at sunlight and 2 adults who never learned how to ask for help, something was rebuilt. Not a perfect life, but something better. Something that chose to stay. Chose to wake up early, hold a bottle steady, pick up mismatched socks, and whisper into a crib, "I'm here." That's what coming home really means sometimes. Not returning to what was, but choosing what could still be. If this story touched something quiet inside you, something you hadn't looked at in a long while, leave a comment below. Not to explain, just to say I'm still here too. Because sometimes that's all it takes. One honest voice, and the sound of someone else staying.